NASA and the Space Program by Rena Kroll. What is the Space Coast? Florida has about 1,200 miles of coastline. Of these, most have special names given to them by the different people who have lived in Florida over the years. There's the Treasure Coast, the Gold Coast, and the Natural Coast, just to name a few. Have you ever heard of the Space Coast? It stretches along the Atlantic from Palm Bay to Titusville. Here you will find one of the headquarters of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. At the Kennedy Space Center, you will also find Cape Canaveral, the starting point of America's first voyages into space. Welcome to Florida's Space Coast. Fasten your seat belts. You're about to take a wild ride into the space age. The military comes to Cape Canaveral. The Cape Canaveral story has a launch site where spacecraft takeoff begins in the 1940s. The United States military was testing rockets at a base in New Mexico, but then a rocket went off course and crashed in Mexico. While no one was hurt, the military decided it needed a rocket range from where people live. The military turned to Cape Canaveral. A cape is a point of land extending out into the ocean. Cape Canaveral offers many advantages. Few people live in the region and rockets could be launched over open water. The Indian River separates Cape Canaveral from mainland Florida, which increases privacy. The warm climate would allow the military to launch rockets year-round. The military took over the Cape. They transformed abandoned homes and businesses into military buildings. They began constructing roads, runways, and launch pads. In 1950, the United States military launched its first rocket from Cape Canaveral. Then, in 1957, all eyes turned to space. The Soviet Union, a country that was made up of Russia and other countries, launched a satellite to orbit Earth. Americans were shocked that they had not produced one first. The Soviet accomplishment spurred the Americans to build their own satellite. Only a few months later, the United States sent up a satellite from the Cape. The space race had begun. For the next several decades, the United States and the Soviet Union competed over space exploration and launched more than 5,000 spacecraft. The United States soon realized it needed one agency to organize and carry out the space program. In October 1958, NASA was established to develop and launch spacecraft. It made Cape Canaveral its major launch site. The United States launched a satellite in 1958. Explorer I was its first entry in space race. Almost immediately, NASA began to run out of room. Officers needed to look around for a new launching site. They thought about Brownsville, Texas. That site was rejected because they didn't want to fly rockets over areas where people live. White Sands, New Mexico, did not have any outlet to the sea. How about South Point, a Hawaiian island? Hawaii was too far away and a site there would be too expensive to build. In the end, NASA turned to a spot in its own backyard. Merritt Island was located just north of Cape Canaveral, across the Banana River. NASA got to work building a first-class spaceport, a site for testing and launching spacecraft. In 1965, The Kennedy Space Center of Physical opened for business. Cape Canaveral's early years. Spanish explorers first visited Cape Canaveral in 1513. Canaveral means place of the cane. The cape served as an important landmark for European sailors and appeared on some of Florida's oldest known maps. Starting in the mid 8,000s, a few American 18,000s, a few Americans settled and even business began moving onto the Cape. Over time, small villages sprang up, but by the 1940s, the population of the Cape stood at only about 100. NASA launched her headquarters. Today, NASA launches most space voyages with crews from the Kennedy Space Center. NASA also sends up unmanned rockets spacecraft with astronauts from the United States Air Force stationed on the Cape, though KSC is actually located on Merritt Island. Many people refer to both the Cape and the island as Cape Canaveral. In addition to Cape Canaveral, NASA has 9 other field sites. The Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, serves as command control. Other locations around the country focused on research. Let's take a quick tour of NASA's launch headquarters. Millions of people from around the world come to the Kennedy Space Center to learn about the space program. Space shuttles are put together at the Vehicle Assembly Building, standing 525 feet tall with 8 arches of floor space. It is one of the largest buildings in the world. The Corlo transporter weighs 6 million pounds and travels at 1 mile per hour. It carries the space shuttle from the Vehicle Assembly Building and the launch pad. Space vehicles and missions take off from these launch pads. Some are in use today, while others are historic launch pads. Teams direct all launches from the Launch Control Center. From the viewing area, visitors to KSC can watch space shuttles lifting off from launch pads 39A and 39B. The Space Shuttle lands on a shuttle landing facility at the Gildo. If the shuttle lands at another NASA site, a 747 jet carries it back to KSC. After landing, space shuttles go to the orbiter processing facilities to be inspected, tested, and repaired before their next mission. Space programs at NASA. has sent up many satellites and spacecraft from Cape Canaveral. In 1961, NASA sent its first astronaut into orbit around the Earth. Later that year, it started to work toward a challenging goal, landing astronauts on the Moon before the decade ended. On July 17, 1969, NASA launched Apollo 11 with 3 astronauts aboard. A few days later, on July 20th, the spacecraft landed on the Moon and Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin stayed foot on the Moon. NASA has been the world's only space program to put astronauts, 12 of them in total, on the Moon. In 1973, NASA launched Skylab, which was a space station, for close to half a year. 9 astronauts live and work aboard Skylab. They gather information about the space environment and learn more about the needs of humans living in space. In 1981, NASA opened a new era in space travel with the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle is the only reusable spacecraft. Space shuttles have wings so they glide back to Earth at the 3-mile-long runway at KSC. Astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle conduct experiments and prepare satellites. Some satellites, like a powerful Hubble Space Telescope, are put in place by the Space Shuttle. Hubble has been orbiting the Earth, taking spectacular pictures of planets and other objects in space. In 1994, it caught images of a comet crashing into Jupiter. Since the 1960s, NASA has also launched space probes to explore the galaxy by taking measurements and pictures. Sometimes the probes even land. In 2024, rovers or robot vehicles sent back pictures of the landscape of Mars, which is covered with rocks, craters, and reddish-brown dust. NASA scientists also use satellites to study Earth. Satellite pictures have revealed bizarre natural activity on the Earth. Some even in Florida. Images have shown a mysterious pocket of water in Florida Bay that had changed from blush green to black. Other pictures capture red tides along Florida's coast. They were caused by dust from Africa's Sahara Desert that traveled all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. If you go to the NASA website, you can see these images, and even what Florida looks like from space, just the way the astronauts see it. The International Space Station. Another exciting NASA program in the International Space Station. In the 1990s, NASA partnered with 15 other countries to build an international space station. Aboard the space station, astronauts conduct many experiments. They are working hard to learn more about the health and safety of humans in space. Hundreds of people on the ground contribute to the program. If you visit the Kennedy Space Center, you can see this amazing process take place. At the International Space Center, some workers put the space station together, others test and repair equipment. Some people partner with the space programs from other countries. Astronauts also come to work here. They train at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. But at KSC, they try out the actual machinery they will be using in space. Then they blast off. Over the years, NASA technology has led to many useful inventions that we use every day. Some of this technology just makes doing things easier, but sometimes it actually saves lives. Scientists from the Kennedy Space Center even work with Florida's police department to make video footage clearer. This technology helps the police identify criminals. Infrared thermometers. Take a person's temperature just got a bit easier. NASA first developed a special technology to measure the temperature of stars and planets from Earth. Now that technology has been used to create a thermometer that measures a person's temperature in less than 2 seconds. The person does not even have to be awake. Whale tail prints. NASA engineers develop special software or programs that help computers run certain functions. To figure out how space shuttles work, today marine biologists use this software to create a file for each humpback whale they photograph. The file is based on the features of the tail. A whale's tail print is unequipped, just like your fingerprints. Using this database, infrared technology has proved to be a big help to Florida in many ways. Today, the Florida Highway Patrol uses laser guns that beam an infrared light to catch speeding drivers. These laser guns are remarkably accurate. Florida firefighters putting out blazes in large buildings, such as shopping centers, also have started taking an infrared camera along. The camera is mounted on top of a high ladder and pointed at the building. The pictures let fighters see everything that is going on in the area. Even researchers, growers use this technology. Planes carrying infrared cameras take pictures of growth. Using special software, computers then count the trees and identify any unhealthy ones. The future of space. What does the future hold for the space age? Obviously, no one knows, but NASA has lots of plans for the future. As part of this research into settlements on other planets someday, astronauts aboard the International Space Station are experimenting with growing plants in space. Plants are necessary to provide food and oxygen. NASA has announced that it hopes to send robots and use humans to explore the moon. Aboard a new spacecraft called the Crew Exploration Vehicle, NASA also wants to explore Mars and beyond. The Kennedy Space Center helps other communities and countries build spaceports as well. NASA believes that in the future, people and goods will travel by space flight. NASA sees a future world in which spaceports around the globe will launch many spacecraft each day. Why you cannot look to the future and see what the future of space exploration will hold, you can look into the space program. Today, the Kennedy Space Center opens its door to millions of tourists. These visitors welcome to the chance to learn more about space development and examine space gear, and perhaps even experience the thrill of seeing a spacecraft launch. Think about this as well. The year Over the years, thousands of people have settled in the towns along the Space Coast because they want to make their contribution to NASA and the United States' knowledge of the galaxy. These people combine their special skills to create the world's leading space program. Perhaps one day you will join them as an engineer, a researcher, scientist, or even as an astronaut.